Hi there again. My name is Wayne Chia, and I'm part of the TBNAsia team. For those of you who are not as familiar with TBNAsia, we are a nonprofit that believes in fighting poverty through enterprise. And we take an ecosystems approach, and we believe that we can do that through collaboration, dignity, restoration, and hope. Can we have the slides up, please? Now, how exactly do we take an ecosystems approach? Now, ecosystems is a big word. We have a five-pronged approach. The first one, we have the Social Enterprise Training Hub, the one that I personally lead. It is an investment readiness program, and where we help high potential social enterprises be more investment ready. The second one, the Expertise Network. This is a skills-based volunteering program, and we invite everyone, all professionals, regardless of what is your profession, whether you are a lawyer, you're a marketer, you're a salesperson, you're an accountant. We believe you have something to contribute to impact. Conference and events, this is the one that everyone is in. This is where we try to connect everyone in the social impact space because we believe you can achieve greater synergy through collaboration. Investors Club, this is for individuals who are interested to venture into the impact investment space for the first time. Now, I'm not going to steal the thunder because some of my team members are going to talk about that a little bit more. The Resilience Program. This is where all the proceeds of the sponsorship and the ticket sales are being of this conference is going to be channeled to. Now, the Resilience Program has three legs. The first one being matchmaking. The second one being targeted grants. And the third one is our Resilience Fund, which is a debt financing vehicle. But we are actually piloting this just in Malaysia and Indonesia. Next slide, please. Now, next one. Now, this conference wouldn't have been possible without the generous sponsorship and support from all our partners. So we just want to thank all of you once again. Thank you for helping us to make this happen. What we are really impressed by is that you are willing to support us even when we had this crazy idea to pull off this conference within such a short amount of time. So your support means a lot to us, and we really want to appreciate you for that. Okay, before I continue, let's just take a quick look at the rest of the poll, if anything has changed. We still have a fair bit dialing in from Singapore, which is great. Again, a very good spread between NGOs, social enterprises, and private sector. Okay, and foundations. Now, this is the interesting one. What is the most urgent area you wish the panelists to discuss? High on the list, we have enterprise models for affordable housing, raising capital and impact investment being the second one, and the third one being gaps in the market. Okay, well noted. We will make sure that the panelists, I think the panel will make sure they take this into consideration, and this is some of the stuff that they will be focusing on a little bit more. Okay, just a little bit of a background context to our session today. When my colleagues originally suggested having a bonus insertion into the conference, honestly, some of us had huge reservations. Because throwing in a last-minute session into a last-minute conference doesn't exactly sound like a very smart thing to do. But when we found out the proposed content of the panel, things changed. Now, I actually know a thing or two about being homeless. As a foreigner in Singapore, I actually had prolonged periods where I don't have a fixed accommodation. In my early startup days, when I couldn't even afford to pay rent, I actually slept over at my office for months. I crashed over at my friends' places, and I actually know how unsettling it could be living out of a suitcase or a box. But at least I actually still have a roof over my head. Now imagine with me all around the world during this COVID season, while governments are actually urging citizens to stay home, unfortunately, there are a lot around the world with no home to turn to stay home in. I cannot imagine how painful this must be for them. So the team decided that we must do this session and we must do it with great conviction. So this is how this session came about. And the TBN team has even decided to make this session as a bonus and to make this free. So feel free to share this Zoom link with all your friends if you haven't already. This session is just starting. They are still in time to dial in, as because this session is going to make great lunch listening. Without further ado, let me introduce our moderator for today. Priya Trichadi is the co-founder and CEO of Vilgrow Philippines, an early stage incubator and investor that funds, mentors, and nurtures impact in enterprises, building innovative solutions to impact the lives of the poor in Philippines. Priya is also the co-founder of Unlock Impact, a social impact advisory firm that collaborates with people and organizations scale inclusive solutions in Asia. So would you please warmly join me in warmly welcoming Priya Trichadi. Priya, please.
Thank you so much, Wayne. Appreciate that. And really my gratitude to the TBNAsia team for accommodating this really important session. I hope we will be able to get through all of the important issues that the audience is really interested in. So thank you so much. I'm really excited that today we're going to be talking about catalyzing affordable housing through shelter enterprises. Most of us, when we think about housing, we are thinking about the demand for affordable housing as a housing deficit. As Wayne was kind of referring back, do you have a home or you don't? And we think about housing, for many of us, we think about government housing projects and how that is really a key way to address this deficit. But in reality, no amount of government intervention alone can solve the challenges in affordable housing. And that is really important for us to understand as we kind of get into the discussion. Roughly about 2/3 of low-income households globally really struggle to put a roof over their houses, over their heads. And incrementally, they build their homes and they add to their homes, as and when they have the resources. And because all of this is so informal, there are lots of challenges around it. And traditionally, the people who are involved in real estate, the suppliers, the service providers, they're not addressing, low-income customers. And this is really where the opportunity is for social entrepreneurs. And that's really going to be the focus of our discussion today. So despite this huge demand for housing, and despite shelter being, a critical need for low-income households, we don't really hear about innovation and entrepreneurship for this sector. It's almost, absent from impact thesis of many impact investors when we look it up. And why is that? And I think what COVID has done, as Wayne was referring to earlier, is really kind of exposed how critical the need for having an affordable house, but also an adequate and safe housing for everybody. And that is really what our panelists today have been working on. And we we'll be hearing from them on their insights on how, who, and why we should address the gap in high quality and affordable solutions in shelter. So today on the panel, we'll touch on the need for impact investment for affordable housing products and services, but we'll also kind of gather their insights and perspectives on what is really the road ahead for this sector, and especially in the Southeast Asian region, where I think COVID has impacted all of our economies and has really affected those at the base of the pyramid. So let's jump right in. So again, I'm Priya Trichadi. I'm the co-founder and I run of Vilgrow Philippines, and I run an incubator based out of the Philippines. But I also, run a consulting firm, and I got the opportunity to collaborate with Habitat for Humanity on doing an entrepreneurial ecosystem study, in the region. And this really helped us evaluate and see, what are the types of innovations that are coming out of the different countries, and who are the entrepreneurs who are really pursuing this, these innovations that traditionally have not been at the focus of raising capital for impact investors. And this, I think, as through this panel, we'll talk about why that is and how we can change that. So a quick hello to the panelists. So we have Jennifer Oman, who is the Associate Director of the Tawilga Center of Innovation and Shelter at Habitat for Humanity. Jennifer has been leading a lot of the work in the market systems approach to solving the issues in shelter. So I think she will be able to really dive into some of those questions people had about what are the different kind of models that can solve this. We have Mason Tan, who is the founder and CEO of Garden Impact Investments. Many of you, who are familiar with TBN may know of Mason, but one of the things that I know is that Mason was one of the first few investors that I knew who was really looking into affordable housing. And he has been searching for more deals in the region. I know that for sure. So we'll dive into that. And we have the entrepreneur on the panel, Simar Kaulidas, who is the co-founder and director of EcoSDP Technologies. And she's going to tell us about the innovation approach to solve many of these issues. And Simar is also a water activist, and she has been really focusing or dedicating her life to solving these issues at the base of the pyramid. So all of these perspectives will really unlock the insights that you're looking for. So let's jump straight in. Jennifer, if I could ask you to share a little bit more about yourself.
Thanks, Priya. Hi, I'm Jennifer Oman, and like Priya mentioned, I'm working on one of Habitat's market-based initiatives called Shelter Tech. And, Shelter Tech in a time of COVID-19 is really about bringing innovation and connecting the ecosystem into the central role that actually affordable housing plays in keeping people safe, healthy, and also reducing poverty. And probably if we spoke 4 or 5 months ago even, shelter wasn't necessarily on the top of people's minds in the impact investment space. In fact, Priya and I led a session at an event in Bali recently, and that was sort of the finding, is that people don't have a lot of recall for shelter and impact investment and innovation. But now we're all globally sitting here in our homes and in our 4 walls, living and working and doing everything in order to keep our families safe. I think in recent trends in housing and entrepreneurship, indeed, as Priya mentioned, in the impact space, we haven't seen a lot of recognizable, scalable models. However, the highly recognizable ones outside of the impact space have been maybe more in the developer segments, in property technology. I think even people would associate with some of the IoT trends in terms of smart cities, smart home solutions. And these are all important and interesting trends. I think COVID-19 has made us face the reality, though, that for many people, basic living conditions are very poor. They're unsafe, particularly in terms of shelter. So if you have a roof that leaks on your head during monsoon seasons, or if it's made of tin that's going to turn your house to be 45 degrees in the summer months, dirt floor, cramped conditions, staying at home or sheltering in place is complicated or really impossible. So today, I'd really like to share with you, we started to phrase around what really is the role that the innovation ecosystem can play in changing this paradigm. Habitat for Humanity International is a well-known organization in the United States and in some markets in Southeast Asia. We're sort of best known for President Jimmy Carter from the United States building homes with volunteers. And about 10 years ago, we realized that the gaps in the housing markets in many of the places that we work were insufficient in terms of addressing affordable shelter needs. Government alone cannot build enough housing to respond to the gaps. And like Priya mentioned, many people aren't necessarily going to build or receive a government subsidy. They may actually be building and improving their own home over time. You can change, yeah, thanks. So we developed about 3 years ago a program called Shelter Tech, and Shelter Tech is evolving into a global innovation platform that's going to accelerate housing solutions and innovations that really look at improving the lives of low-income households. It builds upon Habitat for Humanity's global experience over the last 50 years, really, leveraging our extensive network, our corporate donors that are, industry experts, providing a boutique and really niche experience in terms of mentorship, connections, and even funding for startups. You can change to the next one. We've also at the same time realized that we want to work and accelerate and identify and accelerate entrepreneurs. We also want to help them attract funding. So we set up Shelter Venture Fund, which is an impact-focused fund investing in promising shelter innovations. It's internal and small at this stage, but we're looking to grow it and really see and help entrepreneurs realize the potential of their scalable solutions. And finally, I think our goal under this umbrella of our innovation and entrepreneurship work is really to say, how do we support entrepreneurs with great solutions, build scalable models, and actually make shelter a top 5 category for impact investment over the next 5 years? Because shelter is really at the core of many of the top needs that we see, certainly in Southeast Asia, but really around the globe. So I'll stop there and share more in the question section.
Thanks so much, Jen. Mason, we'll jump over to you if you can share a little bit about you and maybe your interest in this space.
Sure. Thank you, Priya. Thank you, Wayne. Hi, everyone. My name is Mason, and I am a co-founder and currently CEO of Garden Impact Investments. We are a social impact investing firm based in Singapore, but we focus on providing expansion capital to small growing businesses that want to tackle social injustices, issues like poverty, income inequality issues in Southeast Asia. We have few sectors that we're looking at, and in fact, social housing project, whatever name you may call it, is one of our key focus. Our goal as an investor is not just to focus on purely financial returns, but also social impact returns, which can be including both output and outcome, which I will elaborate further on down the road. I've been on this journey for the past 10 years, ranging that I used to be a banker in the corporate banking world that transformed me to become a banker for the poor, to be a voice for the poor and the marginalized. Simply because I think that is something that the social housing issue in Southeast Asia has not been adequately addressed, despite a prosperity in this part of the world. I mean, imagine you're going to metropolitan cities like in Jakarta, that there is still at least about 300 slums in the metropolitan city area. That gives me a very deep thinking about what is the purpose of making money that but we are unable to help the others. So I think from a even pure humanitarian purposes that we believe humans deserve a standard housing. Standard housing means they should have indoor flush toilets. They should have access to proper shower facilities. They should have proper roof and not sleeping on the streets or living in the slums. You hear a lot of such stories in India, in Philippines, in Indonesia. So that what motivates me to jump into this, to become a full-time social impact investing space for the past 10 years. But more than that, I'd like to share about this exciting new initiative launched by TBNAsia. Can we have the slide, please? It's actually about the formation of this investors club. So I just want to highlight that Garden Impact is a member of the investor club, but it is not the investor club. I must remind all of you that it is not an investment vehicle. It is merely an association of like-minded people, whether you are individuals or ranging to a family office or even to a disillusioned professional, say, I want to do something about it, but I want to help the make the accelerator a success story. Oftentimes I see a lot of accelerators have great innovations, but they can't go beyond commercialization stage. So this is a challenge that I think that where we can put in our capital, not just talking about huge fund, but really more of providing the funding gap between what I call the Death Valley gap, because startup angels, family people, individuals are willing to put up capital up to 100,000 US. But for a traditional venture capital, private equity fund, if the funding is less than $1 million, they are not interested to do the deal to justify the transaction cost. So we are advocating that the member investor club will fill in the gap with funding between 100,000 to $1 million. So which is very crucial to lift these members of the accelerators up to the next level to be commercially viable and scalable. So I think this is something that as an investor club, next slide, please. That people that we come here together and share together our knowledge, our experience. For example, simple topics like how do you measure whether your project is successful? How do you measure that whether a 3 years, 5 years investment period is reasonable or unreasonable? So very interestingly, I've been facing a lot of questions. How do you define a patient capital? Oh, patient capital to me is 3 years. I say, that's not patient. Patient capital means 10 years. So I think we need to get our head, our mindset correct first. So a lot of time when we talk about sustainable, it is not just a buzzword. It is about, are we really want to change the next generation? Are we talking about leaving a legacy behind for the next generation? So when we talk about sustainable impact investing, it has to be long-term, 7 to 10 years at least. So I will not share too much at this juncture. I will, jump into more Q&A later on when I have the time. Thank you. Back
Okay.
to you, Priya.
Thank you so much, Mason. Thanks. Simar, over to you. We'd love to hear about your background and your enterprise.
Thank you. So I'm Simar. I'm dialing in from Bangalore, south of India. And I am essentially a filmmaker and a water activist turned entrepreneur. And well, if you could open up some slides, I'd just get to the work that we're currently doing. It is important that you're involved with local communities and you understand the problems firsthand to even come up with a solution. So I think that was the place when I met the other co-founders, Tarun especially. He had a solution for wastewater treatment, for natural, eco-friendly, zero power sewage treatment, because when you look at a lake or any water body, all the urbanization is unplanned for, and there's a lot of sewage that's going into our water bodies and polluting the rivers eventually. And from a housing point of view, if you see that there are, of course, that there are a lot of people who are landless and poor, but there are also a lot of mid-income groups that are contributing to this pollution, right? So when we look at housing, we look at it holistically, and we look at, so many people are dialing in from Singapore. Well, Singapore is popular across the world for how well they manage their water, right? In India, we still have people manually managing the excreta that's coming out, right? Like the sewage is being treated manually. So we wanted to, some of us got together, we wanted to eradicate that. And Eco STP, if you could open up the slides, I'd tell you what it is. So we realized that a lot of people in the city didn't know where their poop landed up, right? And in Bangalore, we have 14 million people. That means 1,400 million liters of sewage per day is landing up in our lakes and eventually our rivers. Next, please. So what we do is we are inspired, our approach to innovation is taking the best models in nature, systems and processes that are working well in nature, and we've implemented that and incorporated that in our design. So the process of taking inspiration from nature is called biomimicry. Bio meaning life and mimicry is to imitate. So what we've done is we mimic the cow's gut in underground chambers. As the sewage, the wastewater from the toilets passes through all these chambers, it undergoes a treatment and the complex molecules break down into simpler ones and you get clean water by the end of it. And we also pass that through a plant gravel filter where the roots do the final treatment. And here we're getting quality that is good enough for putting back into your toilet flush without power or without chemicals, right? So when I met Tarun, so I was not from a water sanitation background. I wasn't from, but I was working with the people on ground. So my expertise then was to really address these problems. Tarun had a solution. We had a finance person. We had, all the scientists and the biologists involved with us teaming up to solve for this issue. And when we started out, we had these prototypes running. And once we acquired a few customers, could we really go to market? And we've been a part of the Shelter Tech program that Jennifer is talking about. And that really opened up our understanding of what are the challenges on ground. And it's difficult to know this by yourself, but somebody who's worked across countries, especially in Southeast Asia, the issues are pretty similar. So now we've been offering the solution. If you could go to the next slide. This is what the system looks like, right? These underground chambers, it's sealed on top. There is no power, no carbon emissions for treating the sewage, right? And you can completely reuse the land on top for, a children's play area and everything. Now we are trying to see how we can adopt this to low-income housing groups as well. Could go next. So that's who we are. I'm representing our team, our 12-member team back home. We are 4 co-founders, and the Biomimicry Institute has been actually mentoring us on how to improve the technology. What kind of materials are we using for the system? Habitat for Humanity is bringing experts in the housing sector. They're introducing us to other startups who are working in this space to see how we can collaborate. And our solution has been featured as a best practice case study by the United Nations. And yeah, so that's where we are. We have about 60 installations coming up in 9 different states in India. And thanks to Habitat, we've been working closely. We've started working with schools, government schools, and schools run by trusts, which support about, children from neighboring villages. Then we're starting there, and now we're going into the housing space. But that has also turned out to be a great place and an alternative shelter space for migrant workers during the COVID period. So that's it from me. Back to you, Priya.
Okay, thank you so much, Simar. And I think, as you were speaking, there are so many, elements and so many issues that we really need to talk about. So I'm going to jump right in. So I think the first thing I want to address is, and I'm seeing some of the questions come in, and hence, Jennifer, I'm going to go to you. When we are talking about housing, the first thing that kind of comes to our minds is, addressing the core issue of, having a roof over somebody's head. As we were doing the research across the region as well, when we spoke to people, that is the only image that people have about, how do you solve housing. So I want to jump into, what are really the gaps in the market when we are talking about, low-income communities? Are we talking kind of in a one-dimensional sense of, just ensuring that people have shelter? Or are we talking about key gaps that makes, home adequate and safe? I think that is the most relevant question given, the time and period that we are in this COVID impact world.
Yeah, it's a good question, highly relevant, Priya. I think that, of course, homelessness is a problem in many countries. What I think when we are talking about shelter, though, in this context right now, we're really looking at how do you also, those who have houses, are they durable, safe, are they affordable? We live in a disaster-prone region, a highly disaster-prone region. So it's not enough to just have a roof above your head. We have to also make sure that it's built in a way that's, not going to put you at risk. And, if there's an emotional aspect to housing, and people want to pass this down from generation to generation. We did a study about how to talk about certain technological improvements, and we actually found that talking about the safety element of it wasn't necessarily attractive. What actually people want to do is be able to pass this down to the next generation. That's what was important to them. So I think that there are a host of challenges with that, but it's not just about having a house. Government in the past has provided large scale development projects. I think Singapore has been done some very successful models of that. Those haven't worked everywhere. Not every government has the funding for subsidizing shelter at that level. And I think that the other thing to recognize is that there's a whole group of people that aren't necessarily at that subsidy level, but still have quality issues. So they're the working lower middle income or lower income, if you will, if you think about it from a pyramid perspective, there's vulnerabilities there, and they're building and improving their shelter over time. And so a lot of the needs that they have aren't met from finance. Having financial products that are well suited for their economic situation, or for maybe their land titling situation and land security. I think I touched a little bit on the disaster and the resilience element of that. There's the labor aspects. Many places, laborers are not required to be trained, actually. And so can you design products or services that make it foolproof to do it in a way that's safe and secure and well built? And so I think those are some of the issues that we touch upon, but I think that in the region and really across the globe, we cannot expect the government to be the only provider of affordable housing. And I think even in the Philippines, particularly, there was the government called upon the private sector to respond and step up. And so I think that that's where entrepreneurs can play a really interesting role in addressing some of those opportunity gaps there.
Thanks, Jennifer. So, I think that's a really interesting point, that it's a host of issues. It's actually an ecosystem of issues that need to be addressed for someone to have or be, have the dignity of life and have affordable and adequate housing. And that's where I think the opportunity for entrepreneurs and innovation really comes in. Mason, you've been looking at Southeast Asia and looking at, what are the models in affordable housing. So just going back to the gaps that Jennifer identified. So as an investor, when you look for, that product market fit, what does that mean in, housing and shelter for you as an investor?
Sure. I think the very first thing that we look at as an investor is the scalability of the product and the services. Because as an investor, our goal is to help the social enterprise to scale. And I'm not talking about scaling 10%, 20% a year for the next 5 years. I'm talking about 3x, 10x, or 100x. This is very simple. Just to illustrate an example, people talk about affordable social housing project. When we talk about affordable, it means we need scale. Just a very simple maths. The average cost for building a 10 units project versus a 1,000 units project is very different, hugely different, because of the economy of scale. But we are not talking about exploiting the poor for making the money. We are talking about how to be more efficient in building 1,000 units cost a housing units project so that we can pass the savings on down to the poor. You know, we are talking about in today's market, we talk about, using the benchmark of 10,000 US dollars, excluding the land costs to be considered as affordable. Anything above 10,000 US dollars is beyond the reach of many poor and the marginalized. So having said that, at 10,000 US dollars per unit, 1,000 unit means a $10 million project. So it is not a small feat to just say, someone to say, I want to build 1,000 units, but where do I get access to the $10 million funding that can fill in the gap? So oftentimes, I also realize that many social enterprises are undercapitalized or poorly capitalized in terms of the balance sheet. No big developer or contractors is willing to work with social enterprise that I have only $1 or $10 as a capital, paid up capital on the company. So we as an investor, we like to come in and help to strengthen the balance sheet, to strengthen the business model, and to help them to be qualified, to be integrated in the so-called mass market construction or land cost. So I think this is some of the couple of key things that I see the challenges that this social housing project are facing in this part of the world. I will stop here for now.
Okay, thanks so much, Mason. And we'll dive a little bit more into, investor expectations and, raising capital for entrepreneurs in a little bit. Simar, I just, kind of continuing on that, understanding kind of the gaps for the low income segment. And you are an entrepreneur who is trying to adapt a solution that currently is focused in kind of the middle income segment. And so when you look at translating or bringing that model to a different kind of income group, how are you understanding the challenges? Is it very different? Are the priorities different for the customer who's at whose income levels are lower than what you're currently targeting? And it would be interesting to know, as a business, as an entrepreneur, is that shift easy for you to make? Because the reason, kind of the context for that question is that I think in Southeast Asia, we are seeing a lot in kind of the higher income, the property tech space. There are lots of different models, but not many in the affordable segment. And one of the questions I think, as ecosystem players, we need to ask is it replicable? Is it adaptable to a low income?
Yes, thanks for the question, Priya. So to answer that, well, Habitat is helping us get the technology to the low income groups as well. So the technology can be plugged in, right? And how we work is we design the system, but we do not construct the civil structure, right? So whoever is building the homes needs to build this, and we come in to train the contractor and so on. So in terms of whether it's a good fit for that market, of course it is. The solution will work anywhere besides extremely cold countries. So the technology works. The technology is scalable. Like, say, we can treat 10,000 liters a day up to 1 million liters a day. So it's scalable like that as well. In terms of, I think the bigger challenge here right now is who is going to put in the capital investment of building that civil structure, right? But it looks like there are a lot of NGOs, a lot of people on ground who want to support this work. The major gap is in understanding what housing really means, right? I think it is not so much just plugging in a technology here or there, but it's more like, we are creating a space for people, especially low-income housing groups, especially like your sanitation workers, construction workers, who if they have a good space, their health improves, the family income improves, our GDP improves. Like, you know, all of these are interconnected. So I think the major gap is in really understanding how we can work together, how the SDGs are connected. If you bring housing, you know, to the center of the SDG map, you will see that you can address all these other goals through, you know, through a plan where you're designing for the whole system. And so that, did you have a particular question? Sorry, I may have lost
No,
track.
no, no. Don't worry. I think that's articulated super well. So I was just kind of understanding for you as, you know, because yours is a technology kind of can plug in with a contractor. I was thinking about, did you have to change too much in your business model? Did you have struggles? And maybe, I think you asked, you know, a very important question, who will pay for this solution, right? Which is an interesting model, which also means that, you know, in the models that we're talking about in this sector, it's not necessary that the low-income customer himself or herself is paying, but there might be, you know, other ecosystem plugins that could make the model work, which is, I think, a very important point. And so maybe just a quick follow-up to that is that, so for you to adapt that and build those partnerships, would that, you know, has that been difficult, or, you know, maybe you're just going through that? And then I'll
Yes,
kind of jump
going through that, and with Habitat's support, we are working on few projects. We are exploring how we could plug it in. Of course, the housing sector itself has its own challenges, but also, you know, the way we look at capital investment, if you have a technology or an innovation which is, say, nature inspired, which is designed to last 7 generations, imagine the return on those investments, right? So even a middle income group that invests in our technology recovers their money in 2 years' time, right? So we have to solve for these problems. We know that everything needs to be addressed in a decentralized way. Those structures are already there. In terms of implementation, I have a feeling it's just about working on a few pilots and seeing what is working for India or for East India or for South India. So that's where we are right now.
Okay, wonderful. So then kind of I want to change gears a little bit to, you know, the big question. So as an entrepreneur who's working in kind of this niche space of, you know, water and sanitation, I'm sure you've been you've made the rounds of raising capital. And so I just want to kind of put it out there to understand, you know, as you've kind of moved up, as you validated your technology, what has, you know, the fundraising, you know, journey been for you? And has that changed now that you're looking to scale up and have to convince, you know, investors that, you know, you need capital and your model can work? How is that experience for you so far?
So far, we've been a profit-making organization from day one, right? Because there are policies in place that say every building, every slum, every center needs to have a sewage treatment plant, which means that there's a market for it, right? So the fact that we have prototypes that have stood the test of time, the fact that we've validated our work, the fact that the customers are coming back to us with their second orders, third orders, is a validation that, okay, we are in a good space. And in the last 1 year, 1.5 years, a lot of people have reached out to us for investment, but we've gone a little slow in terms of, you know, what happens when investors come in, especially if they're not from an impact background, if not looking at impact returns. It becomes a little difficult to like prioritize low income groups and prioritize those other things, right? So we've been very careful about who we bring on as investors. Habitat is helping us. They've made us funder ready. They've made sure that the product market fit is in place, that we are process oriented, that, you know, our teams are goal oriented. So that is there. And how we capture our impact over time, like we've treated 64 million liters of sewage already, right? Without investment. So I think investors are really coming in, firstly, to help us understand in a deeper way what kind of collaborations we can have, especially in the low income housing sector. Secondly, how we can really scale up because it's not just Bangalore city. We're already operating in 9 different states in the country, and we want to build prototypes in many other countries, especially in Southeast Asia. And that's where Habitat is also helping us meet the right kind of people and liaison with the right kind of people. So the main thing was, does your product work? Does your technology work? Is it as per pollution control board norms? Is it aligned with the policies in housing that are available? Once you tick mark those things, and if you have a product that fits the market, investments are bound to come in. So I think that is the main situation here. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that takeaway. I think, that really kind of helps put in perspective where you are as well. And I think encouraging for a lot of entrepreneurs, if they're listening to hear that, I think that product market fit, once you have that and once you can show that, people are willing to pay for your product or service and that impact is to be had, then, the investors will come in. So hang in there. But I'm going to ask, Mason, that is not always the case, right? I think Simar brought up an interesting point that, once you have external investors and, they are sitting on your cap table, they're sitting on your board, and maybe their impact mandate has, XX returns over a lifetime of their fund, then, maybe the company will have to start making trade-offs on the impact side. So the question to you, Mason, is how important, because sometimes entrepreneurs face a cash crunch and then, they may feel the pressure to kind of bring investors in without maybe, doing the due diligence and understanding the impact intentions. So how important it is to take time to bring the investors on board, especially when in today's scenario, when cash is so critical. And how do you really go about selecting and making that match? And do you recommend a particular stage where external investors should come in?
Very good question. I think first advice to the social entrepreneurs out there in the market is not all investors think the same. So I think you cannot assume those who have money means they share the same vision with you. They may have some ulterior motive from you. But for me is we are a impact first fund, but it doesn't mean we sacrifice the importance of financial return. But what we believe is that we want to help the social entrepreneurs to achieve great social impact returns, plus with a modest financial return. I think this is very important because without being financially sustainable, you cannot deliver a sustainable social impact. You're just more like a touch and go. You're telling people that you are making impact, but what kind of impact? Is it a superficial impact or you're making a lifetime impact? So I'd like to highlight that there are many kind of investors out there in the market. They may claim to be social impact investors, but I would encourage each social entrepreneur to really understand well. It is always easy to have a good relationship when things are going well. But when times like this, are you able to access to your investors, or are you reachable by your investors? That's the key question that many people will be challenged. But I'd like to share a bit about something about this thing. What investors are looking at, for me, from my perspective, is really more of a cost-effective solution, not a perfect solution. Many social entrepreneurs are good as, sorry to say, as the dreamers, but oftentimes we need solution yesterday. The social housing project is not something that has been just started. It has been around for decades and still has not been resolved. I think social housing to me is a humanitarian issue. It is a human dignity issue. It is a way of giving meaningful life to the poor so that they become productive citizens to the society. We cannot blame the poor for being poor because They don't have the access to even proper housing. They don't even have access to a safe environment. Not sure how many of you have visited slums, visited areas. Kids are growing up in a violent environment. They are being emotionally tortured. They are being mentally tortured. This is the case, especially during this current COVID-19 situation, that we see more and more domestic violence being happen, not physically, but mentally and emotionally. It was very interesting when government talk about practicing social distancing, washing your hand. But I think when you have 10 people living in a space of 20 square meters, how do you expect to practice social distancing? How do you practice clean water or hand washing when they don't even have access to clean water, except to the nearby polluted river or even well? So I think this is something that we need to be awakened to this, the urgent need to have a social housing fund that I've been advocating along. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Mason. Kind of just linking that back to what you said earlier, Jennifer. You on your slide you had a fairly ambitious goal that you want to make shelter one of the top 5, impact investment areas. So I just want to dive a little bit into, how you are looking at, investments into shelter enterprises. And I think one of the big challenges that we face a lot of the time is the entrepreneur and investor kind of expectations. And sometimes, or many times, these are not aligned before, especially at the early stages when investments are made. So how does Habitat for Humanity think about investments into the sector? And how do you plan to, what is the path to making this, one of the top 5 investment areas?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first question about our own fund and how we ensure sort of alignment, I think that, we created an internal fund to test the waters because we realized that there was very few, if none, impact funds dedicated to affordable housing and new technologies in that space, as our study that you worked on with us also revealed. It was just sort of more one-off, and it wasn't really meeting those impact theses that funds may have. So the fund, Shelter Venture Fund, is the name of the fund, and it's managed in-house out of Habitat International. And the idea behind putting together an accelerator was really to also create a channel or a funnel for the pipeline, because we also recognize that there were some, 5 companies that we were able to invest in our first year and a half. And we want to create a larger pipeline that can feed into other impact investors, their thesis and their goals as well. And we just found that some of the companies that we were exposed to just weren't quite at the right stage fit. And we're really looking for scalable solutions that we can help really ensure that market fit is there. And to Mason's comment, social housing or affordable housing is not a new area, but there's been challenges in uptake maybe of new products or new services, or so how can we find the ones that are going to have that high growth potential and can really make an impact in the space. We're very true to our impact mission there. I mean, Habitat is a shelter international NGO, and so we really are looking at identifying companies that will be a good fit and feature that well. And I think that's why the accelerator and the fund are working together. And our accelerator, like I mentioned, it's not it's not just generic acceleration content. We take the basis platform of many accelerators and build upon that with lots of ecosystem connections to ensure the success. Like Simar mentioned, how do you connect into the affordable housing space? How do you connect in so that we can help entrepreneurs to sort of see that path and that journey towards growth? and realize their growth opportunities and potential that they maybe hadn't thought of. I think sometimes it's also about helping entrepreneurs to see or tweak product innovation to be a better fit, and hopefully over time we build a great portfolio of entrepreneurs. We've currently worked with about 50 globally, so we're just in our first 2 years. But again, we're not looking to have hundreds, rather a small portfolio of really high quality innovations. So in terms of reaching that sort of impact investment target, building that pipeline, building out a portfolio, and helping entrepreneurs connect with other impact investors as well as other ecosystem players. I mean, Habitat is, maybe we're leading shelter tech now, but the idea is not that we don't have to own that. We'd like to see other accelerators even add this as a theme, and hope that we can demonstrate that by great partnerships and lots of ecosystem connecting.
All right. Okay, that sounds great. So Mason, just linking back to what Jennifer's saying is really kind of showcasing, or they plan to kind of build this pipeline of shelter entrepreneurs. So from an investor perspective, when you're looking at market opportunities and if these enterprises can scale up, are there specific challenge areas that that you're looking at that you might want to talk a little bit about?
Sure. I can talk about that the next 1 hour. No, just kidding. But maybe before that, I like to show the slide on this. When we talk about social housing project, it's not just a so-called building materials per se, or a individual approach. As you can see from this slide, it's actually involved also land acquisition. It involves talking about dealing with government agency, about the site design, locations. It also involves construction and offtake, involving making sure there is the buyers can access to affordable banking lines, facilities. So there is a lot of, you can say, steps, but also a lot of risk involved. I think what I'm trying to highlight is that even like for us, when I invested in a affordable sanitation project in Indonesia a few years ago, based on World Bank research data, there's a need to build 10 million toilets throughout the whole Indonesia. So you can see there's opportunities. And simple, just people cannot afford toilets, their own toilet, just because they don't have the money. Their money is first used to buy food for themselves and for their kids. And yet, when you talk about shared communal toilets, let me ask you the first question. Are you going to wash a public toilet for yourself, or you expect someone to wash the public toilet? Or when you have your own personal toilet, you will definitely take care of your own personal toilet. So these are simple human behavior that we need to understand. So we have been also working with a lot of NGOs, disaster relief agency, about, as what Jennifer mentioned, that this part of the world is very natural disaster prone, typhoon, earthquake, all these things. And each time they try to go in, they cannot build enough housing units before the next disaster strike. And, I just want to highlight this, that even for this COVID-19 crisis, it doesn't break anything. It just shows that how broken our social housing system is. It is already broken, but nobody fixes it. But unless you fix it, you cannot expect the productivity of the citizens in that country to rise. It's easy to say, oh, we go and fetch water. In Singapore, people ask me, you want free water, you go get easily open a tap water. But in remote countries, like even in India, they have to walk hours and miles away just to fetch clean water. And which is why you must understand many children are not going to school, not because they don't want to go to school. They have to fetch the clean water for their family. So these are things like social issues that we have not been paying enough attention to. I just want to highlight this. Even for social housing, we're talking about two different areas. One is urban poverty, and the other one is rural poverty. So in rural poverty, it's very simple. You just, because they don't have materials to build. But in urban poverty, many people are not just facing financial poverty issue. They are going through many mental issues like depression, like stress from their employers, like kids cyberbullying. So this is a complex issue. It's not just putting in money and expect money to solve the problem. So I think, in fact, I see this crisis not just presenting dangers, but as well as opportunity. I'd like to share one advice is this. Let us not just see these as numbers, but let us learn to humanize these numbers. These are lives. These are not just another house, but each house can bring the brokenness, restore the brokenness in the family. That we see that many migrant workers are forced to leave the family, not because they like to, but they need a jobs. If we can provide enough work for them, they don't need to leave home. They will stay home and build a family. I mean, it really alarmed me when I hear that at least 100 million children in China are not being raised by their immediate parents because their parents have to migrate to another cities to work. So there's a lot of social issues that come into my mind when we talk about social housing project. But I would really encourage that people come together and explore ways, there are different sectors that we can help, because shelter tech is not just about housing. It talk about healthcare. It talk about access to affordable food. It talk about safety, instead of a violent environment. So that's my takeaway.
Absolutely. And I think, that kind of is a great segue into what I wanted to talk to all of you about next, is really what, the impact of COVID-19 has shown us for this space, right? I think there's been, we've seen images of migrant workers being stranded, being put up, in temporary housing, and so many issues around that. So I want to dive in a little bit, and maybe Jennifer and Simar, I think, Mason kind of alluded to some of those challenges. We are asking people to stay home. We're asking people to, socially distance, to keep washing their hands, assuming that, they're living in a space where all of this is adequately available. So what has, COVID-19 for you, Simar, as person who's engaged with the community, what are we seeing on the ground which was already happening, but has really been exposed, as Mason referred to, the broken systems in which, these communities are living, and where, your home is where you are supposed to feel safest and hide out from this virus, but it may not be possible. What are you seeing on the ground?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about here, but something that struck me a few days ago is I was in a school that we're involved with, and there are a lot of migrant workers, the construction workers, the backbone of the construction real estate industry, the ones who build our homes. They trying to get back to their state, but there was, because of lockdowns and everything, there was just no arrangement made for them. And then, I mean, this is the real problem. As Mason pointed out, all issues are actually social. We are in the Anthropocene, right? We are creating this for ourselves. And unless every entrepreneur, every citizen thinks like an activist, and it's really sad that these are basic human rights and we have to be an activist fighting for these basic rights for everyone, right? It's really sad that we have to think of it like this. So, the construction workers who are trying to get back, well, it's so easy to blame the government for not having enough policy. but the good that came from the local communities and the strength of local communities is what took care of them, provided them temporary housing in schools, and that really, thinking of an opportunity as an entrepreneur that, hey, we can have a system where our schools, which have the space, can be converted into like temporary housing spaces for migrant workers, particularly, or sanitation workers during a COVID outbreak, right? Or during a pandemic. So it really, but even when the government finally made available buses for construction workers to go back, the police were charging people money for registering, and it was not something that they should be doing, especially these are like poor laborers. And all they wanted was to go back home. They were like, we've been stuck here. I used to get videos of people in camps where they were the labor camps, right? They were like temporary sheds, and this is the time when it starts raining, right? So they're calling us, sending me messages and videos from inside their camps, which are flooded, and they are in remote areas, and we don't even know who to get in touch with to provide them some food, some support, some shelter. And it's really like a huge challenge. I think the only way we can really build more resilience is by having strong local communities, right? Like, so like in Bangalore city, we have a system where the city is divided into multiple wards, right? So every ward should have a strong local community of citizens who have the time. There's so many retired professionals who have the time to ensure that all these things are met, right? So during COVID-19 outbreak, I think the discrimination that we have for people, especially like, we realize that people have very deep we look at people from low caste systems, and those we they don't there's no dignity of labor for people doing odd jobs like cleaning toilets and things like that. So it is difficult for a lay person to say, invite them over to your place, seat them on your own table and feed them food. It's so difficult, right, to talk about equality to a layperson. But the government cannot discriminate, right? A government is like the constitution ensures that it sees everyone equally, right? But the kind of measures they took during the COVID period, and every citizen should talk about these things. And every entrepreneur especially should be looking at the system more holistically, and that's how you find the right kind of partners. Now so many schools have reached out to us saying, oh, because they met me on ground addressing these issues is why they learned about my work in the water and sanitation space, and now they want to implement that technology in their schools as well. So I think being on ground, being involved, being a citizen first, fighting for equal rights, I think these are like basic things that each one of us, especially as an entrepreneur, you can't fight, you can't choose battles like that. You cannot say I'm like a water activist. You cannot just say that I'm providing a solution, to solve for wastewater issues or the housing issue or something. You have to stand for sustainability, justice, and harmony as you go, and you fight all battles as they come. So I think this is what I learned during the COVID period.
Thanks so much for that, Simar. I think that really kind of puts, the human touch on, for a lot of us who are, lucky to be at home and be connected to internet and have these type of conversations. That by that itself means that we are in a fairly safe and adequate home ourselves. Jennifer, kind of a variation of that question for you as, Habitat, when you're looking at this crisis and about this issue that, you guys have been working on for decades, what might be some of the solutions, because they might be needed, this is not going away overnight. So when, what is your approach as Habitat when you're looking at, affordable and adequate housing in the crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at it from a market or a systems perspective, I mean, the system's in shock right now. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of affordable shelter is built by the informal segment. all of which has been put on hold. People are not currently investing in shelter, right? They're unable to. Masons, carpenters, a lot of them are informally employed. Their income has been disrupted. Supply chains have been disrupted when borders shut and stay-at-home orders were put in place. So all along the way, people have been, really feeling the impact in the housing space. And in terms of what Habitat is looking at is really to understand the market in crisis right now and say, what are some of the things we can do to when it's appropriate to jumpstart and help people recover, and also to think through sort of longer term, how might housing market actors or entrepreneurs be responsive and ready. So some of the entrepreneurs, for instance, in our shelter tech portfolio have made pivots in this period to actually say, okay, if I'm going to weather COVID, I have a product or service that can actually be relevant today. And so we've provided them with a little bit of conditional grant or catalytic grant funding to help them secure some government contracts or pilots in order to provide temporary fast shelter for medical workers and quarantine facilities outside of hospitals in densely populated areas, but that can be therefore transported to somewhere else when the need is no longer there. So, trying to encourage and find those potential today and help entrepreneurs survive this period and reimagine what their product or service might look like. And we've also been looking at, from a humanitarian perspective or a humanitarian lens, making sure that as cash assistance comes into markets, that and people do have incentives to start or rebuild, that labor markets are safe and that there is decent, safety and security measures for this segment who, there are much of the labor market for construction is informal. So how do we ensure that there's safety and security for those workers? And then finally looking at longer term, ensuring that people are able to improve their house and their housing so that it is at, a decent level. How do you find those solutions to ensure that they can improve their housing quicker, make it safer, and at an affordable range? So,
sure. Thanks for that, Jennifer.
Great place to do that.
Yeah. I think, a lot of questions actually from the audience around, what you just spoke about, Jennifer. I think, Simar, going back to what you were sharing about migrant workers and even refugees around the world. I think we have quite a few questions from the audience that even, in a place like Singapore, where affordable housing, is touted as the example, the housing for construction workers and laborers, migrant workers, that has been, those homes have really not protected them, or, we're seeing a lot of the outbreaks from there. So feel free to jump in, Jennifer, Simar, or even Mason. But Jennifer, maybe a quick question to you. Have you seen any models, innovations that are being deployed, into these type of housing arrangements where we have large scale, either refugees or migrant workers, because they really are in the most unsafe kind of shelter spaces currently?
Yeah, so I see the question now. And I certainly have seen and paid attention in the news that a lot of the hotspots in Singapore were in the migrant dormitories. And I think that, Habitat prescribes to the sphere standards, which talk about the basic amount of space that people need in order for shelter to be considered safe, secure, and decent. And I think that when we look forward at building, mass housing, we just need to keep that in mind, because obviously that's a huge issue. I mean, I think Singapore does have a reputable affordable housing model in the country, and I think that there are bits of it that are certainly replicable or lessons learned that you can build on there. But I think in many places, the governments simply don't have that amount of funding to put forward to building in that way. And that's why I don't think you've seen it as scaled in other places. And, you know, like I mentioned earlier, you know, the Philippine government has actually said, you know, the private sector needs to step up and find models that complement our work, because we're not going to be able to build our way out of this ourselves. And I think that that's where other market actors come in these other geographies and in these other countries.
Thanks. Thank you for that. Simar, I don't know if you wanted to share any other models that you're seeing in India that address
during our training at the Shelter Tech program, we met other innovators who, for example, had like model homes, which could, like, you know, which could still work even during a cyclone, or because there are lots of housing projects in low-lying areas in India, right? So they are usually affected by a lot of natural disasters. So they had worked on that. And when they came to Shelter Tech, they could pivot, you know, they were like, okay, let's just do this for construction workers, or maybe, you know, design it slightly better for the manager, because that kind of, it's a fact that that kind of hierarchy is needed, you know. I've seen that there are technologies available. It's just some pilots need to happen so that that can be scaled up. There are other innovations around roofs, for example, you know, using alternative material for replacing the regular tin roof
CGI.
that we have. And yeah. So there are innovations. We are working in the water and sanitation space. So we're like, can we put together our technologies and build that framework and implement all of these in one place? But that will take some time to get there.
Kind of that, you know, that value chain, all of the different things that are needed to, you know, ensure adequate and affordable housing. You know, Mason, going to you for another question from the audience. How do we get, you know, the real estate industry, which is booming in this part of the world, and commercial property developers, how, you know, will this, you know, the low income, you know, affordable segment be of interest to them? Traditionally, we've seen that they've stayed away from that, and it's seen more as kind of a government intervention only. Could this segment, you know, the real estate companies potentially become investors or impact investors in this space? I just wanted to get your thoughts on that question.
Sure. And I think, you know, this is a excellent opportunity for collaboration between established real estate developers and players like Simar and even affordable abodes which gather impact invest. I would just have to highlight that, first of all, I hope this COVID-19 crisis is able to change the minds of many real estate developers, shifting from a pure profit-centric to be more a socially responsible corporate player. You know, I mean, even in Malaysia, you know, although despite the government has a regulation that they need to set aside 10% of the development units for affordable housing, not many has fulfilled that requirements. But I like to change the mindset of a few things first. First of all, when we say affordable, low-cost housing, it doesn't mean it's poor quality. It doesn't mean it's cheap, but in poor quality. And I think people have this misperception, just like what our team has shared in a couple of days ago in a session, talk about, you know, even 3D printing has suddenly become very affordable, not like in the beginning. If you know, even solar panels, you know, cost has dropped substantially. And so we are trying to embrace new technology innovation to able to scale up for a social housing project that that are sustainable and permanent. We don't want to build a social housing that is danger to the resident, meaning it will collapse after 1 year. So even like for affordable, they are using a plant called canaf to incorporate as a building material to substitute cement and sand. And they have been through the fireproof testing that they're able to withstand 1,000 degrees Celsius of fire and for 2 hours and nothing is being damaged to it, because that is a very important criteria. Imagine you use that material, a so-called affordable social material, biocomposite material in the slums. When one unit is on fire, the whole slum resident of few hundred units will be on fire. So I think we need to encourage the corporate players to change the mindset, start to embrace technology, start to embrace changes so that they can make it more affordable. Like I said, the biggest obstacle to scaling up is scalable. In talk about we need to do not build 10 houses at a time, but build 1,000 units at a time in order to achieve the cost saving that we hope to achieve for all. Back to you, Priya.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that, Mason. I know there are lots of questions around kind of migrant housing. I think, we've addressed some of those topics. I don't think we'll be able to cover all, but I think Chloe has shared a link on another panel discussion organized by HealthServe around this topic. So maybe if the TBN team, if you could share that link with the audience, maybe in the chat, I think that would help. I want to kind of, go a little bit more macro and kind of bring some of the things that we were talking about from a question from Stephen. Is really, looking ahead at Southeast Asia and South Asia, about 70% of the population is said to be going to be living in urban areas, in the next 10 to 15 years. And that opens up a lot of questions about pressures, about, how the economy is going to handle that. But I think, shelter is really at the center of that move and what that paradigm shift would be. Because I think, all of us are talking about migrant workers and migration to the urban areas, to where jobs are, where opportunities are, is what we've seen in the last decade, and it's only going to increase. So when we look at this region and when we look at the importance of solving what could potentially continue to be a crisis and one that many governments will not be able to solve on their own, Jennifer, I'll jump to you. So what do we really need to see? And innovators and entrepreneurs are going to be really important, along with many of us in the ecosystem who can address this, because it will ultimately become a socio-economic issue.
Yeah, I think that we need to see people working together and collaborating. I mean, we have to apply a sort of a systems approach. I mean, really thinking about what are all the pieces and the levers that we can ensure that people have access to safe, decent, affordable shelter. And I think entrepreneurs who are new to the space might have some hurdles to certainly overcome to get in, but I think they bring a fresh perspective, and I think that that's something that's necessary and needed to solve or address both the challenges and the opportunities that this poses for populations in urban areas. And we can't ignore the migratory patterns, and we really need to build and design products, services, financing mechanisms that are really responsive to what people want, and address those challenges head on. So I think that entrepreneurs have a real opportunity here to play a role, but they need to play, we need to be more collaborative and come together in order to address a lot of those, the challenges of urbanization. And we've been working through the Shelter Tech program, which, last year ran in Kenya and in India. So in Kenya, we were even looking at co-living spaces, some different rental opportunities that address the fact that not everybody moves to the urban area permanent. They keep a home back in the province for as their permanent space, and they obviously are flexible and fluid in terms of employment opportunities that they pose. But what are the different models around that, and how do you connect in? And I think there's some interesting and promising practices there as well. I'll pause there and allow though Mason and others to reply.
Sure. I think Mason, just to jump off from what Jennifer said around collaboration and need for people to come together, and I know that's a big part of the work that you do with TBN and, in your personal relationship with investors and others as well. If we want to make the shift, we all, at every conference, at every panel, we will talk about collaboration. How do we really leapfrog and get to a space where all of this is actively more, happening more easily and really taking some of these risks together? How do we make that happen?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this. Maybe I can ask the tech to put up the slides on TBN. Yeah. So I think, as most of you are aware, that there are 5 pillars within the TBNAsia ecosystem, but these are not silos. These are not isolated. They work with each another. So for example, we talk about investor clubs. So investor clubs have access to pipelines of projects. We work with accelerators like, Habitat or even Shelter Tech Venture, that where we go through the social enterprise training hub, that we learn to help social enterprises to be investment ready. Oftentimes, in social entrepreneurs have a fear of reaching out to investors. Am I ready? Am I scalable? So we are helping the social entrepreneurs to be so-called investment ready, meaning that we help you to look at your business model. The robust, are they robust? Are they as term sheet acceptable? We can even help the social entrepreneurs to finalize the term sheet with the investors by sharing our own experience. Also on the investor club, member of the investor club can also rely on the expertise network. So for example, let's say if you are an investor in the West and you are very interested to invest in a project in the Philippines, but you know that this social entrepreneur need help, need coaches, need mentoring, need people. So we can tap on the network of our members, volunteers who are located all over these countries. So as far as I know, there have been many interests in people who want to be investor clubs. Again, it's a learning journey together. It is not an investment vehicle. Currently, we have members of investor club in Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Indonesia, and hopefully soon in Australia and Japan. So what we're trying to do is to share my pain, my scars, my failures, my tuition fee, to helping fellow members to really help to scale up this social impact ecosystem. Why I say it is important, because it is no point to be the only fish in this ecosystem pond. I rather have more fishes together and help to keep the ecosystem sustainable. So we are not just here about conferencing, networking. We are here about, okay, follow the famous Nike slogan, just do it. We want to do it and putting in something. So I like to advise that why is one of the benefits of co-investing or sharing with investing, which I think is a very common topic, is that just imagine that your very first investment, let's say you have a pot of money and you put 100% of your money into one project. The answer is 0 or 1. It's either a failure or you succeed. But when you spread your pot of money to 2 or 3 projects, even if 1 fail or 2 fail, you still have 1 success story to talk about. This is what I realized that many family offices, sorry to say, are very skeptical of this. Oftentimes we need early success stories to encourage other people to jump into the bandwagon of social impact investing. That's the whole purpose of this TBN network. We want to share our success story. And of course, you want to hear our war stories, we'll be happy to share with you as well. And then it's about cross-learning. It's about collaboration. It's an open platform. It is not about my accelerator or your accelerator. It's about how to help the poor together as a community of showing faith and compassion to others. That is my whole objective of this TBN Asia ecosystem.
Thanks for that, Mason. I think, that's a thought that we kind of want to stay on. I just want to I know that we are out of time, but I just want to quickly, get a word in from Jennifer. And Jennifer, I think Mason referred to all of these challenges and how we need to come together. But I think we also need to be able to see and find and support these entrepreneurs at those early stages, and bring kind of all of these people together to help the innovation scale up and impact more lives. So, when you're looking at Southeast Asia, what is Habitat thinking about in supporting shelter enterprises?
Yeah, so we're very excited to launch Shelter Tech in Southeast Asia in, hopefully our call for applications will be around August. It will be a fully virtual accelerator. Focus on Southeast Asian entrepreneurs who are bringing promising, interesting, and potentially scalable models into local markets. We are really excited to build out and are in the process of building out quite a unique offering that connects not only with the important business principles that an accelerator can bring, but also really helps connect entrepreneurs with industry players, with technical advice, R&D facilities, industry mentorships. So I look forward to being able to share more about that call later in July and August. And that it's about a 6-month program. At the same time, it will be concurrently launching as well in the Andean region. So, we've really globalized our Shelter Tech offering and are happy to be supporting more and more entrepreneurs worldwide.
Thanks for that, Jen. And Simar, I know that you have been passionately working in this space for so long. So as an entrepreneur, if you wanted to share an insight or a call to action, what would that be?
Oh, well, I would say it's important to have partners on ground to spend 80% of your time understanding the problems. It is also important to have the right kind of mentors who have their heart in the right place. Because of course, no mentor would advise you against not making profit, but profit with impact, right? So, and I think Habitat, the Shelter Tech program particularly was very good because we've been a part of many accelerators in the past. And we've learned, that how you can innovate with your business model, how you can reach out to the industry, storytelling, all those skills we learned. But with Habitat, it was really special because we had more mentors in our workshops than there were startups. That's the kind of attention we were given, right? And the focus on having women take on leadership roles and represent and to have a voice, and all these things came into effect, not just because the framework says so, but because they were really meaning that. So I would really like to thank Habitat for Humanity's Shelter Tech program for really encouraging us and helping us showcase our work in the right platforms where we can make an impact. And I think the key takeaway from today's session as an entrepreneur take is collaboration is where it's at, right? Because even in nature, all organisms collaborate. They work in an interdependent way. The system is based on mutual respect. And I think that's what we need. And I learned that the urban poor is what needs the most attention, because workers, when they go back home, they still have the river, they still have, the farms to work on, at least from an Indian context. I think the most atrocities are being acted out in the city. So the city needs special attention, and we're urbanizing so fast. So cities are important. Also scalability, to look at large scale projects rather than interventions in one home or two homes, to even, like Mason said, that would even bring down our capital investments lower. And if we're using the right kind of technologies, then we can have the impact for a larger period of time. And that good quality housing is important, that mental health is equally important for people, and that when we approach a problem, we have to look at from all aspects and also bring in not just sustainability but regenerative design, you know, in our thinking, in our approach. And to that, I will leave some links in the chat room about biomimicry, about websites that are beautiful triggers for entrepreneurs to start thinking that way, to start thinking how nature thinks. So that's it from me.
Thank you. Thank you for that beautiful thought. On that note, I really want to thank the panelists. Thank you for spending your time, and thank you for sharing your insights. I think it's been a fantastic discussion. I think the key theme of this panel, and I'm sure any panel that you're listening to as well, again, is collaboration. And I think intentional collaboration. I think, we may not always get everything that we want in a collaboration, but if we don't collaborate, we are not to make even a dent in the problems in these regions. So let's collaborate open and honestly, transparently. Let's support entrepreneurs, because ultimately they are risking everything to these, solutions happen. So let's try and work together to make that happen. And I'm really, really grateful that we could have this special bonus session, Wayne. So thank you so much for your time, participants. We couldn't get to all the questions. I think, Jennifer, there are some specific ones for you. So if you want to type back quickly as Wayne takes us through the close. Again, thank you so much for your time. And please reach out to us. I think Wayne's just shared the emails. We would be happy to answer any questions you have. And please do look out for Shelter Tech Accelerator. There's a lot of amazing support for entrepreneurs on that platform. Thank you. Back to you, Wayne.
Thank you so much, Priya, and the wonderful panelists for your great sharing. I'm sure you guys have helped make this bonus session very worthwhile. I see that there are a couple of participants who are still hanging in with us through their extended lunch break. So thank you so much. We hope you have enjoyed yourselves. Some of you guys have asked for the contact details of our panelists, which we have actually added. We have pasted that in the chat window. So if you can just open up your chat window, you will see the panelists' contact details, which you can reach out in case you have anything to follow up with them on. All right, moving on. Now, there are a couple of next steps that you can work on if this has really fired you up. First one, we invite you to join us. As what Mason has actually shared, TBNAsia is actually building up a network of investors club. This is still in the works, but if you are an individual or you're a family office and you like to venture into the area of impact investments and you like to learn from people who have been there, done it, like what Mason said, he's willing to share his battle scars. Now, I don't know how many impact investors are willing to do that, but he would like to, people like Mason would like to invite you along to have more fishes in the same pond, right? So if you are based out of Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Hong Kong, and you would like to find out more, reach out to us. We will be bouncing a poll right now to get some feedback from you on the session. And at the end of the last question on the poll, we will indicate there's a question. If you'd like to indicate to find out more, and if you say yes, we will be in contact with you. So we'll leave the poll open and kindly fill up the poll. We hope you can see, everyone can see the poll, and kindly provide your feedback so that we can be in contact with you. Okay, next session. Crisis and capacity happening at 5 p.m. We have Jian from Citrin Capital as the moderator, and you will see a couple of familiar faces. People like Priya. So we will have capacity builders in the region share more about their program and what exactly their programs are doing or how they are adapting to this particular crisis. Definitely exciting. If you're a social enterprise or you're someone in that space, we definitely want you to join us. But we also have another special session coming up. Now, we have intentionally made the TBNAsia conference a little bit special from some of the other impact-oriented conferences out there. We always want to make TBNAsia conference first-time friendly. But this time specifically, we have a special session called The Reframe, led by our Master Coach Kim Pong, where we will try to walk you through what are some of your strengths, your experiences, and how you can help others. And that actually is the start to the impact ecosystem journey. So we invite you to come along. If you have never been to any of Kim Pong's session, this is a great one. If you have never been, if this is your first impact-oriented conference, this is definitely one session you want to join. Spread the word. Tickets are still available. I know we are coming towards the end of the conference, but I believe you would agree that every session is worth its weight in gold. So if you have friends who will want to participate in the last few sessions, pull them along, send them the link. Tickets are still up for sale. Last but not least, contact us. If anything that we've mentioned about our 5 pillars have interested you, we have left, this is our contact details. We have also left our contact details in the chat window. So take a look at the chat window. Our names as well as our respective pillars and emails are there. Feel free to reach out. Last but not least, Social Enterprise Saturday. Now we have an impressive list of social enterprises that are exhibiting and pitching and sharing what exactly they do as well as the impact that they are creating. Join us this Saturday to get up close and personal with these guys, as well as ask them questions, right? Ask them what are some of the things they need and figure out how you can get involved. This is an excellent opportunity to get to come into contact with the social enterprises in the region. Now with that, we are at the end of our session for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you at the next session at 5.